The Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute is driving bold policy solutions for a resilient Canadian agri-food system and building a stronger future for Canadian agriculture. Visit capi-icpa.com to discover how.
I'm Lyndsey Smith with RealAgriculture. Joining me now, it's Josh Linville. He's Vice President of Fertilizer for StoneX. Josh, it's been an exciting week. How are you doing?
Well, I'm a little tired, and it's only Wednesday. We're not even halfway through this sucker.
Ain't that the case? Okay, so it has been a very busy week. We will get to the threatened tariffs on Canadian fertilizer, of course. But let's back up a little bit with getting an update on sort of where things are at in the fertilizer market, sort of large scale.
Yeah, so let's start globally. When we look at the nitrogen markets, and specifically we're looking at urea, we've actually seen some softness. And this is something we started talking about several weeks ago. We looked around the world and said, no, wait a minute. S&D wise, we're improved from this time last year. You know, you got more Chinese exports. Russia's still doing well. Middle East is quiet. The only real shortfall that we see today is European production is still at 75%. And frankly speaking, natural gas prices continue to fall. They're in the upper eights, lower nines, which is something we haven't seen for a while. So all of that combined with the fact that a lot of your manufacturers around the world still seem to have December shipment product left to sell, and there's just not a lot of excitement over the next 30 days. This thing should continue to look soft. Now, that does not mean UAN and anhydrous prices are going to fall along with it. They have plenty of their own problems, but at least urea is trying to lead that charge lower. Phosphate has come off significantly when you look at Indian and other global prices out there, off about a couple $100 from the absolute highs. We still think there's a lot of problems there. A lot of the issues we've been talking about are still present. But one thing that I will say I messed this up, is China. January through, say, May, they didn't export anything. But all of a sudden, May through October, they exported 4.5 million tons. That's a lot of tons in a short amount of time. But we think those tons are going to start disappearing again as we get November, December data and then into 2026. So that should stabilize that market going forward. And potash, you know, aside from this tariffs, Corey, there's nothing to talk about on potash. There was a contract signed between Russia and China, similar to one they did back in June. That price increase, $2. That's how quiet potash is. There's just nothing going on there. And that's great. It's well priced. It's where it needs to be. Let's hope these tariffs don't really throw that into a situation.
A situation. Let's put it that way. I want to back up just a bit on that phosphorus movement. As you said, a bit of perhaps a surprise because it was so quiet first half of the year. Any indication as to the why? Like, is that just a needed to get some product out? And I mean, I know it's China, so it's an educated guess, but do we know why?
Yeah, keep in mind, normally speaking, they normally export between 8 to 10 million tons. So when we're talking about 4.5, 5 million tons for an entire year, that sounds like a
It's
lot. And
still
it is.
right.
It's still half of what they would normally do. And we don't really know why it is that their exports are still reduced like they are. There's a lot of
Yeah, right.
theories, but as far as firm details, that communist government, not exactly forthcoming with those.
Yes, that's today's interview is brought to you by being somewhat facetious. Anyway, so it's true. These are the things in markets we have to grapple with, right? As we don't
Yeah.
always have a lot of transparency on these things. Now, all right, so let's settle on the potash discussion because so first let's lay out sort of the landscape here. So Canada, obviously, huge producer of potash, huge seller of potash. The main source that U.S. farmers use is out of Canada. Who are the other players? Where do sort of potash flows sort of move globally?
So when you look at it, Canada is the largest producer, the largest exporter in the world. They account for, I think it's about 88, 90% of all the imports that we bring into the U.S. marketplace. Massive. Makes sense. They're literally our next door neighbor. So of course they would be a big one. The problem is, okay, if we start to upset them, where else around the world do you start to go to? Our second biggest supplier, and they only do about 8 to 10% of our imports, Russia. We're not exactly on good standing with those guys
Not
either.
exactly, no.
Yeah, and then you start going down the list from there, and it drops off fairly quickly. So that's the unfortunate part is this is something we need to watch very, very closely.
Now, we should state, and this is, I mean, I feel like every interview we do when it comes to tariffs on, tariffs off, whatever, you have to timestamp it just because things change. This is a
Yeah.
threatened tariff on
Yes.
potash. This is not necessarily in place or real or would even happen. But I know that for those of us here in Canada, sort of caught us a little off guard. This is one of those, I feel like it sort of falls into the banana category in that, potash reserves are something that you can't just decide you have them. Like they
Right.
live where they live. And so there's
Right.
a reason that Canada is such a huge exporter of potash. So from your perspective in the last few days, living, of course, in this fertilizer market, what has this sort of even this threat of tariffs really had people talking about?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a threat. It is not anything he's followed through with. And what I'm hoping is this is another situation where people take him at his word rather than his negotiation strategy. We've seen him throw out outlandish threats and claims and things like that. And it's an attempt to get the other counterparty off balance, offset. Because if you're set in your ways and I come to you and try and change your mind, you're going to say, no, I'm not going to listen to you. I have what I have. But if I come and I completely rock your world and you're like, oh my gosh, what in the world is going on? I don't know, even know what to think anymore. Well, you're a lot more willing to now negotiate. So I'm hoping that's the case. But you're right. The U.S. is highly, highly dependent on imports from the rest of the world, from Canada, from Russia, in order to meet our needs. Now, we do have potash reserves in the U.S., and we've actually got a new mine going in Michigan. There's increased production now around the Moab region. We've got it down around Carlsbad, New Mexico. So we have some, but it pales in comparison to what our demand is. And to your point, I think we have more reserves. Reserves don't do you a lot of good if you don't have access to it, if you haven't been building your way down to it. And that's going to take years before that happens. So, yeah, and it's a thing. We always look at it from, you talk about the U.S. S&D, you talk about the Canadian S&D. It's really the North American S&D is how we look at it. And that's why we've never worried about it until we start doing stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so, I mean, I think from the outset of the Trump administration, from the Canadian perspective, there have been certainly those products, and potash being one of them, where it's one of those that the U.S. absolutely needs in large quantities, and we have it very close by. It feels like, it's a win for U.S. producers to have access to Canadian potash. So definitely does feel a little out of left field on this one. But as you mentioned, maybe it is just a little wake up call that, nothing is necessarily off the table in the
Right.
negotiation phase, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what it is. I think this is just trying to get some attention and say, listen, we need to talk. I'm not going to be able to get you to the table quickly if I don't threaten you with something. So this is what I'm going to go with this round.
Now, let's also mention a tariff on potash coming into the U.S. would significantly increase the price to U.S. producers. That's how
This is
tariffs work. So what happens
right.
with price?
Well, and this is where I think Washington, D.C. politicians kind of get messed up on their view. There are some tariffs out there where, let's say you're Canada, I'm the U.S. And if you are ridiculously highly dependent on my demand for your product, and I can go elsewhere to get that product,
Mm-hmm.
well, then you're going to bear the brunt of that tariff rate. You're going to have to
Yeah.
sit there and say, listen, I can't take my price up because they'll just go to Russia, Israel, wherever it is, and get the product from there. So I have to reduce my FOB price to
Yeah.
basically account for that tariff. That's not the case here. Unfortunately, when you look at it, I'd say in this case, this is one of those situations where the U.S. needs that Canadian ton even more. So what's going to happen is they're going to sit there and say, listen, U.S., you're going to tell me if you want this product, you're going to pay my price plus the tariff rate. And we've
That's
already
right.
seen
Yeah.
that in some of these potash contracts that we've seen similar back early this year. And the contracts basically stated, listen, if there's any tariff rate, you're paying that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's one of those things where it's like the politician can say, yeah, we did it. They paid us the tariff rate. Yeah, but they did it using U.S. dollars.
Yeah, that's right. And that I think is the really key thing to think about. There aren't many products
Mm-hmm.
that, from this perspective really work that way because the US is just such a gigantic economy. But there are those very few, and this is one of those. So I
Yeah.
suppose we see where it goes. Okay, just in our last few minutes here, Josh, looking forward, as you said, this is like, what's the seasonality here? Are we in line with seasonality for prices on, let's say, N? Potash, we'll see what happens. But at least on the nitrogen side, are we holding to a seasonal trend, or how does that look?
That's the problem. When you look at the last several years, and it's not just 1 or 2 years, it's been several years. There have been so many crazy things happening in the world. There's no normal anymore. You would normally sit there and say, listen, you set your lows in the summertime. You rally that price up into the fall. You have a little bit, maybe you have a reset in the winter, and then you rally that price in the spring. Those no longer hold true. I mean, when you start talking about global wars and you start talking about, threats among neighbors and things like this, these things are completely blown out. So I guess I would say it was interesting to see that both your urea and the phosphate prices fell like they did. Not as surprised on the urea, a little bit surprised on the phosphate. But we'll have to wait and see how the next couple of months go. See if there's another opportunity to jump in. One thing that we're really pointing out, and this is one of the situations, the further away you get from the coast or away from the Gulf, I still think there's a situation we need to worry about as we get into Q1. That's logistics.
Mm-hmm.
We could sit there and say all day, I think XYZ product is going to go down $20 a ton. It can happen, but there's so much product to move in a short amount of time. There's a lot of demand out there for spring. If the price goes down 20, but your logistics goes up 30, you can sit there and pat yourself on the back and say, yes, we called it right. We actually did well. And you're still paying $10 a ton more for that product.
Mm-hmm. I do love logistics, but I don't know if it loves me. So there you go. That's how it works at times. Okay. All right, Josh Linville, thank you so much for joining us here on Real Agriculture. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
For the latest ag news, agronomic advice, and more, check out realagriculture.com and Real Ag Radio.